Hello, everyone. Gabe here from the Spinecrackers podcast. And I just wanted to do a video today about all of the books that I read in January. I know these videos are kind of whatever, cheesy, but they're also, people like them. And, I've set a goal for myself this year to try to read 100 books, which I've never done before. I don't think I've ever even gotten close. And so, call this a form of accountability as well, or something like that for myself. Hopefully this will be relatively quick. I'm not going to talk in too much detail about the books, and a couple of them we either already have episodes out for or will be having episodes coming for relatively soon. So I will talk about those ones not much at all. All right, so let's just get into it. It was a good month. I read some great things, some not so great things, and hopefully I can keep the pace up going into February. I just started Moby Dick the other day, so that'll probably slow me down a bit. But I already got another book in that's going to be for the podcast that I won't spoil in the first couple days of February. All right, so first one I read here, and I think this is going to be roughly in the order that I read them. Not quite, but pretty close. So the first one I read is Paul Auster's The Music of Chance. This is I have mixed feelings about Paul Auster. We read, what's it called? Moon Palace early on for the podcast, and I didn't like that one too much. I read years ago the New York Trilogy, which I loved. And so I think that's the only two Paul Auster novels, or the New York Trilogy is kind of three novellas, I guess. So I wanted to kind of keep going with him. I also have a couple others of his that I'll be reading probably this month or next month or at some point this year. Anyway, Music of Chance. This is the story of a guy who's sort of not down and out per se, but kind of lacking direction in life. He is a firefighter and kind of he's separated. His wife lives in a different state with his daughter, and he kind of is just kind of floundering, and he comes into some money when a relative dies and decides to quit his job and starts kind of driving around the country. And he runs into this younger guy who he sees kind of like on the side of the road. And he turns out he is sort of a kind of transient, poker player. And who's just gotten beat up because he lost some money or got in trouble with somebody or something. Anyway, they get together. The poker player, I don't want to talk too much about the plot of all these books, but long story short, the guy convinces him to front him some money to play in a game with these two eccentric, super wealthy guys who won the lottery and then parlayed those winnings into a bunch of successful investments and businesses. And so they're really rich, and kind of, the young guy's like, I can beat him, like, no problem. This will be easy money for us. They wind up losing, and they wind up losing everything, including the main character's car. And they're just kind of stuck there, and they're now in debt to these guys. And in order to pay off the debt, they work out this deal where they have to build this huge stone wall out of relocated castle materials from, I think, somewhere in Ireland that these guys had flown over. And that's basically the plot of the book. The plot of the book is that it's about these two guys building this wall in this field for these eccentric, billionaires. And there's some twists and turns and weirdness that I won't get into for spoiler reasons, but I liked it overall. It definitely had a little bit more of that, what I liked so much about the New York Trilogy, which is just kind of Paul Auster being a little weird. If you've read the New York Trilogy, it's a very kind of strange collection of texts. And one of the things that I liked about didn't like about Moon Palace, I should say, was that it felt a little bit more straightforward than what I was expecting based on what I had read from Auster before. And this one had a little bit more of that kind of weirdness. It's a weird premise, and it's just kind of an interesting little book about the way that chance, the role that accidents have in shaping our life trajectories, as opposed to, say, our free choices or anything like that. So nice little book. We are going to be reading another Paul Auster novel for the podcast, not this one, in a few weeks, so I'm looking forward to that. Second book I read in January is Italo Calvino's The Baron in the Trees. I love this book a lot. Another one with sort of a strange premise. It tells the story of Cosimo, I forget his last name, Cosimo, from the perspective of his brother, and they are children in a aristocratic family, but not sort of like the upper crust of aristocracy. Their father holds some kind of purely formalistic, but not particularly meaningful in terms of power or anything like that. In I forget what state or like what Italian region the book takes place in. But the premise of the book is at a young age. I think he's supposed to be like 10 or something at the beginning. I forget exactly, but Cosimo has a spat with his parents at the dinner table about not wanting to eat some specific food or something like that. Something very typical of a child that age. And he goes outside and climbs up in a tree and says, "I'm never coming down." And he doesn't. And the book is sort of a kind of just bizarre, like a bizarre Forrest Gump story, where it's the story of this guy's life who moved up into the trees and never came down. And he, you see him sort of growing older, and he builds a home in the trees, and he, is ranging, makes these pathways that when ranging all over the countryside and going from city to city. He, falls in love with a woman, a couple really, and has friendships, and stops a forest fire from burning down the country. He gets involved with a group of bandits in the woods and befriends their leader. And it's just sort of, there's all of these weird kind of moments with kind of world history where he sort of, he's communicating with, I think like Voltaire and Diderot. He meets Napoleon from the trees, and it's just this really wacky but brilliantly written kind of follow through of what is, on the face of it, sort of an absurd premise based on, this sort of classic childhood, childish attitude. I'm going to go and I'm never coming back. I'm running away, or I'm going to go hide and never come back. And he does it. And so there was this constant kind of interplay between the absurdity of that premise and the kind of inherent comedy in a lot of what Cosimo does in the trees, and just beautiful, poignant, scenes of friendship and love. And he gets a little dog who kind of lives underneath the tree, and it was really just lovely and just a ton of fun. And insightful as well. So I highly recommend this one. This was my first Calvino. There's another one coming up, but we're going to be doing that one for the show, so I'm not going to talk about it too much. Okay, third book that I read in January was Michel Houellebecq's The Elementary Particles. If you know anything about the show or me, I am not a Houellebecq fan. We read Submission for the show last year, and that was I think that was my second worst book of the year. And you can listen to that episode if you want to hear the sort of big takeaways from that text. But this one, I did like it slightly better than Submission, but not much. Just sort of from a writing perspective, I enjoyed it a little bit more. I find that Houellebecq is sort of, repeating a lot of the same themes. The sort of lack of meaning for Western man, specifically male, and the sort of social and intellectual and emotional stuntedness that sort of produces in people. And I just find that Houellebecq is frustrating to me because I think some of the issues that he's concerned with are interesting and important, right? So, as a sort of anthropological, empirical matter, I do think the question of what effects do sort of, the proliferation of modern technology, porn is something Houellebecq writes about a lot, multiculturalism, those sorts of things. What actual empirical effects do those things tend to have on a certain type of male in the population? What is that? How do we deal with the legacy of the sexual revolution in the 60s? And I think there's probably a lot of stuff in here that's sort of specific to France as a country that maybe went over my head a little bit, but I still think in general, right, these are sort of not completely stupid or irrelevant questions. But Houellebecq's solutions to me are stupid and kind of irrelevant. He's sort of this classic, type of guy that you see on the internet, which is like, we just need to return to tradition. He's very concerned with sort of the death of God and in a very base reading of Nietzsche, and kind of, we need to recover the meaning that religion once granted. And by the way, by religion there, I mean, both in the narrow and the broad sense, I think, it is not insignificant that one of the main love interests for one of the brothers here, Bruno, turns out to be named Christian. So okay, got it. We got it. Houellebecq. Christianity, good. And again, and it's not to say that I'm against Christianity per se or anything like that, but as a solution to what I think are complicated social problems or social questions that Houellebecq is gesturing at, it's a stupid solution. And I'm finding that just thematically and kind of in his general prescriptions and approach, I find Houellebecq to be just deeply repetitive and kind of boring in that way. Some of the other themes that are in this book specifically that were not really in submission, I think, are interesting. About he's a little more concerned about science specifically, and towards the end of the book, the other brother, Michel, starts working on some sort of scientific stuff about life, like life extension and that sort of thing. And some of that is interesting to me because I do think those technological questions are very, very important and interesting from a sort of like species level existential perspective. But I don't think he gets into that really enough. And to the degree that he does, it's kind of a just more of the same. Like, we got to hashtag return. You know what I mean? So, not a fan. But I will probably keep reading more of his work just for, I don't know, sake of masochism, or to further justify my distaste whenever I get into conversations about him. Next up is Graham Greene's Our Man in Havana. This is a very funny book, and probably would be even funnier if I had a deeper cultural knowledge of England in general. Because so what the story is about is a vacuum cleaner salesman who a British vacuum cleaner salesman who lives in Cuba, in Havana, and is recruited by the British intelligence services as a spy, basically. And he has no idea what he's doing. He's never done that kind of work before at all, or as an informant. But his vacuum cleaner business isn't doing well. His daughter is this sort of really interesting character. She's deeply religious. He is not. The mother is not in the picture anymore, but she was also religious, and her daughter sort of inherited that. And but she's also very kind of manipulative of her father, and gets him to buy her things that he can't afford, and just kind of has some control over him. Wormold is the main character's name. But of course, what becomes interesting and even more absurd about the book is, so Wormold eventually, he takes the job as the informant, and he starts just fabricating reports back to the British intelligence agency. And the absurd comedy of the book is comes from how seriously the intelligence people, and he eventually gets like an assistant and a secretary and stuff down there to help him, and they keep pressing him like, okay, when are we going to meet this or that informant, and they're all just made up characters. And he has to try to find increasingly creative and bizarre ways of avoiding that, or talking himself out of it. So it's funny from that perspective. But then of course one of his fake reports actually comes true, and there's this whole question of like, is he writing these characters or events into existence, which is a sort of meta literary point that I thought was really interesting. So yeah, a good quick little read, funny. And some real interesting little details in there as well. I think there's probably a lot more that you could get out of this if you are familiar with, England in general during this time period. This was published in '59, and I'm sure there's some specific digs that went over my head, but I liked it. Okay, next up is Don DeLillo's White Noise. This is my second DeLillo novel, the first one being Cosmopolis, which we did an episode on and which I did not like very much. But this I absolutely loved. This is probably going to wind up somewhere in my top 10. Sorry about this sun stuff. Let me see if I can fix it. Okay, probably going to wind up somewhere in my top 10. I mean, who knows? It'll be high probably, but at the end of the year. So this is the story of a family, focusing on one character who is a professor at an unnamed. It's just referred to as the College on the Hill. He teaches in the department which he basically founded himself. And kind of spearheaded as an academic pursuit in general, but the Department of Hitler Studies. And one of the sort of funny side plots is that he actually can't speak German, so he's a scholar of German history and Hitler but he doesn't know how to speak German, which is a sort of funny. There's a lot of satire about academia in general in here, and that's a funny little detail that I have sort of seen, not to that degree, but it just speaks to sort of insecurity, imposter syndrome, all that sort of stuff that people tend to have in those spaces, regardless of their qualifications. And Jack Gladney is the name of the main character, and he kind of is exemplary of that kind of attitude. And there's a lot of funny stuff about academia in there. There's another character who wants to, Murray J. Siskind, whose expertise is sort of in like pop culture, but specifically like advertisements and stuff like that. And he wants to teach a class on Elvis. And he's also teaching a class on specifically scenes of car crashes in film. So it's sort of about, this dig at the hyper parochial specializations, specialization fever within academia. And it's effective. But for me specifically, I'm just like, hell yeah, I want to take all these classes. That sounds awesome. But that's just my orientation. So the book is broken up into 3 parts. The first part kind of being, setting that scene. Gladney as this professor, he has, I forget exactly what number wife he's on, Babette, but it's more than one, and he has children from previous marriages, and so does she, and they're all sort of living together. And there's a lot of, both poignant and odd in classic sort of DeLillo fashion. Some odd dialogue, odd writing about behavior, but that's just DeLillo, and I liked it in this book much more than I did in Cosmopolis, for example. But scenes of family life and Babette and Jack's relationship, they're both sort of obsessed with death and dying, and a lot of their conversations revolve around this question of which one of us is going to die first. What would you do if I died? What would what would that look like? Which is obviously kind of morose, but I think speaks to, again, the book is a lot about insecurity in general, and how that plays out in the American psyche, specifically. A lot of the scenes early on in the book, but they come back again in the second half, or the third section, I should say. Take place in this supermarket where Murray, the colleague, he only buys these like plain, just like white labeled with just what it is, cans of food, and so then the middle section of the book, which is shorter, it describes this. It's called the airborne toxic event. And it describes basically a sort of chemical spill from a train outside of the town. And it's this kind of rising cloud that is moving slowly, sort of based on the wind, back and forth over the town. And they have to kind of evacuate, and they wind up in this Boy Scout camp building, and then they have to evacuate again. And that's middle section of the book is incredible. It's just beautifully written. He captures the weirdness of an event like that so well. And then the third half is sort of like the aftermath of that, where people don't really know if they've been exposed, if they're sick. Some of the symptoms are things like a feeling of deja vu. There's certain physical symptoms, and they're all kind of like unsure. Jack thinks he's been exposed to a degree that's going to cause his death, which obviously gives him a significant amount of anxiety based on his kind of general concerns. And the other big plot development is Jack finds out that Babette has been taking this drug that is purportedly meant to lessen one's fear of death. And she's been getting it sort of illicitly. The medical company that was producing it sort of went under for unethical practices. And it turns out that she had an affair in order to procure the drug with the guy that invented it, basically. And then Jack, I won't give away everything, but things develop from there. Fantastic book. I could say a ton more about it. I might do a full video review at some point. But I really loved it, and it really turned me around on Delillo, which I was happy to have happen. Next book, this one's a little bit of a cheat because I started it last year and we did an episode on it, but I finished The Complete Stories of Truman Capote. If you remember the episode, we only did A Tree of Night and Other Stories, which is about half the stories that are collected in here because one of us, that was the only edition they could get. And so we have a whole episode on that. I won't talk about it too much. But the ones that we didn't read, the whole book is sort of a mixed bag. There are ones that I really didn't like too much. And there are ones that I thought were just fantastic. I think some of the later stories, it's collected chronologically here. And some of the later stories where Capote is clearly kind of reckoning more explicitly with his own childhood and characters from his own past, I thought were really just kind of sad and touching. Yeah, so some gems, bit of a mixed bag. Listen to the episode. Next one I read, which I don't even want to talk too much about because I almost certainly will do a video for about this book, at least for the Patreon perhaps. But I read William Faulkner's Absalom. This is my second Faulkner novel. The first one was As I Lay Dying, but that was years ago, to the point that, it's when you read books and you have read them so long ago without following up, really, it's like as if you have never read them, basically, especially when you read it when you were young, which I did with that novel. So this is my first adult Faulkner, I should say. I don't even really know what to say. It's clearly in the top probably 5 or 10 American novels that I've read, certainly. And arguably it is the most in spirit American novel that I've ever read in terms of what it says about the country. Obviously this takes place post Civil War, but most of the action is in flashbacks and memories about the Civil War era, antebellum, and then a little bit into Reconstruction. I don't want to talk too much about the plot because, like I said, I'll do a video on it because it's very complicated. There's a lot of stuff that happens. There's a lot of characters, and the sort of way Faulkner sets it up with all of these multiple narrators talking about roughly the same set of events, but from very different perspectives and biases, makes sort of a neat picture of the plot, difficult to come by. But it's just, it's just toweringly brilliant. The writing is just absolutely incredible. It is a difficult book. It definitely took slow reading and rereading of pages to get a handle on what was going on. But in terms of just a novel that crystallizes so much about America, obviously specifically the South, but the experiences in American history that makes the country what it is. This is, you can't really find a better text probably than this one. So I'll leave it there for now. It was incredible. Shocking. Next one that I read that I'm not going to talk about much because we're going to do an episode on it coming up is Italo Calvino's If on a Winter's Night a Traveler. This is sort of a kind of very experimental, postmodern, metatextual, whatever you want to call it, novel where Calvino's doing a lot of addressing of the reader. The reader becomes a character in the story, and there's a bunch of text within texts and novels within the novel. So I won't say too much about how I felt about it because we're doing an episode on it this week. So look out for that. Next one, also that I'm not going to talk about too much because we just released the episode on it, which you should go listen to, is Christopher Isherwood's A Single Man. Liked it very much. I don't know why people don't talk about... I don't see Isherwood talked about very much, or it doesn't seem like people are really reading him. I think people should because this book was very good. Last one is Percival Everett's I Am Not Sidney Poitier. If you listen to the show, you know that Percival Everett by Virgil Russell was my favorite book last year, and so I've picked up a few other Percival Everett novels, and I'm going to try to go through as many of them as I can because I can't get enough of the guy, his style, his social critique, and just the humor. He's for my money, Percival Everett is the funniest and smartest writer currently writing today that I'm aware of. The dude is just fucking hilarious. Just like there's just like the funniest jokes that you can imagine in textual form. The whole premise of this book is another one of these kind of absurd premises, but which is followed through in a broadly serious way. The main character, his mother is sort of an eccentric, but also becomes very wealthy because she's an early investor in Ted Turner's. He's Warner, right? Warner Media, or what's Ted Turner's company called? I'm gonna pause it and look it up. He's got a lot of companies. He's got cable companies and all that kind of stuff, and channels and whatnot. You know who Ted Turner is. I thought there was like an umbrella organization, and I guess there's like a Turner Industries or something, but that's not what I was thinking of. Anyway, so she is an early investor in Ted Turner's companies and becomes very, very wealthy to the point that he like visits her personally and they're friends, and he asks her for business advice and stuff. She dies, and so she has a son, and she names the son not Sidney Poitier. That's the son's name. And so obviously there are a lot of linguistic sort of who's on first type back and forth jokes throughout the book about him trying to introduce himself to people and so on and so forth. And it's sort of a like a Bildungsroman coming of age story about him after his mother's death, ultimately moving in with Ted Turner in Atlanta, kind of growing up, trying to go to school. He is sexually assaulted by one of his female teachers. He tries to leave Atlanta and Georgia, is forced to come back because of is arrested for driving while black, basically. There's so much just wacky stuff that goes on. He goes to college for a time, and he meets his professor's name is Percival Everett, who's clearly modeled after the author Percival Everett. And he becomes a character in the story. he winds up in a small town getting arrested again, but then ultimately exonerated, and then helping them try to find who actually did the killing. Ted Turner and Percival Everett come to the town to help. Percival Everett gets arrested. There's so much just wacky stuff that goes on in the book that's both really funny but also really insightful about race and class and place in America. So, and the ending I think is just fantastic, which I won't spoil. So, confirming for me that Everett is one of the most important contemporary writers still working. And I'm going to keep evangelizing for Percival Everett on this channel and on the podcast. So that's it. Those are the 10 novels that I read in January, and a short story collection, I guess. I hope you enjoyed the video. I will probably be doing one of these every month. And thanks for watching. Patreon, if you like the video, subscribe, all that. You guys know the things. They'll be down in the description. Thanks.